Hey, we're back with another lick of the week, and we've finished up some basic and what I consider essential ideas based on Earl's playing, and I've given you some ideas to use to play as backup. And at the end of most of those videos, I've kind of randomly assembled ideas over just a generic chord change like G, C, and D. But I'd like now to apply it to a melody like we talked about at the end of the last video. I want to pick 9-pound hammer because it has the classic 1-4-5 chord progression, which is just some music lingo for a G, C, D chord progression. And the measures are pretty evenly spaced in this song, so let's just use that for our practice tune. Now what we're going to try to do is play some different ideas over the chord changes. To play good backup, you need to know some essential things. The most important thing is, what is the chord progression? By progression, it means what are the order of the chords that you play rhythmically in the background. You know, the melody of a song is your solo, and then the rhythm is the chords and accompaniment you play. So the two work together. Melody is played over the chord changes. So we need to establish what the chord progression is. For 9-pound hammer, it's G, C, and D. And I'm going to attempt to vocalize this, which I haven't done yet, so don't pay attention to my singing. But just listen to the chord changes. And the verses and the choruses for 9-pound hammer have the same chord structure. There's no difference from going from a chorus to a verse. You use the music is the same in the background as far as the chord changes. So we know it's a 1-4-5. What we need to do now is figure out how long does each chord change last in the progression. We know it's G, C, and D, some order of those chords. Now we need to know how long each one lasts. So I'm going to sing it first, and then we'll break it down and count it. It's a 9-pound hammer, it's a little too heavy for my size, honey, for my size. Well, roll on, buddy, with your load of coal. How can I roll when the wheels won't go? Alright, now that was the G, C, D chord progression. Now, how long did each chord last? It's a 9-pound, 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4. One measure. C, 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4. One measure. Back to G, 1 and a 2 and a half measure. D, 1 and a 2 and a half measure. G, 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4. Full measure. Then the next line of the chorus. Well, roll on, buddy. Another full measure. With your load of coal. Another full measure. How can I roll? Half measure. When the wheels won't. Half measure. Go. Full measure. Okay, so now we figured out how long each chord change lasts. So not only do we know the chord progression, or the order of the chords, now we know how long each one lasts. Full measure, half measure, half measure. Full measure, half. Now, we're having to count this now, and if you're a beginner at playing backup, which I'm assuming from these videos, if you're watching them, that you are, or you need some remedial help, knowing the chord progression is one thing, but actually knowing how long each chord change lasts is just as important as knowing the chord progression, because how long you have to work in each chord will determine what kind of ideas you can put in there. What I'm going to try to do is use the licks that we've talked about in their standard form. I'm not going to try to modify any licks or chop them in half, and if I can help it, so that you can hear the full lick using the context of the chord changes. Once you get really good at playing these licks, you get an innate ability to modify licks to fit different songs. So you can take a lick that normally wouldn't fit in the context of a chord change for a 9-pound hammer and modify it, maybe cut it in half, change a few notes to make it fit. That's a skill that you acquire over time with experience. But I want to try to keep this as simple as possible. You know, some of these licks we've talked about, I've modified them to make them easier to play. As you get more advanced, you can, if you want to copy some player's exact version of a lick, then you can do it. Like for Earl's licks, you can play them exactly as he played them. And so it's a building process. So let's try to use the licks that we've talked about in their regular form in the context of this song. And I've got my metronome loaded here. I'm going to try to use my digital metronome here instead of my old wind-up kind. I think it'll be easier to play, easier to hear. I've got it set for about 63 beats. Now what I'm going to do is try to assemble some of the licks that we've talked about. Let's start with measure 1 of the G chord. I'm going to try to use the boogie woogie idea, and it's only going to last 3 beats, and I'm going to finish out that measure with a couple of vamps. It's a 9-pound hammer, it's a little too. Okay, so there's the first measure of your G chord, the 1 chord. And you notice that the lick itself didn't last long enough to fill that measure out. So I used a couple of vamps to fill that out. Now if you want to do a roll pattern over that, beat and a half left over, you can. Listen to this. It's a 9-pound hammer, it's a little too. I finished that beat and a half that was left over with a roll. So it's really up to you how you want to finish that out, but I'm just going to use that lick for our first measure of the song. Now when we go to C, we know we have a whole measure there to work with. I'm going to do the same thing again. It's a 9-pound hammer, it's a little too heavy for my. So you see what happens, I basically reproduced the exact same backup for the 1 chord and moved it to the C, or the 4 chord. So that allows me to reproduce basically the same idea, and it's easy to do and it gives you something to practice. Now what about the half measure? Okay, we go back to G, and we know this G only lasts 2 beats. Well, the boogie woogie lick won't fit unless we trim it down, and I'm not going to do that. We only have 2 beats to work with there. So I could either vamp those 2 beats and then go to D and play 2 beats, but I want to try to play a lick, because the whole idea of this exercise is to use licks as much or not more than vamps. So what I'm going to do is shorten. This is going to be one instance where I am going to modify. I'm going to go against what I just told you. I'm going to modify a 2-finger lick. And again, you know, try to find fingering that works for you. If you want to use your 2 fingers like I talked about before, I'm going to use my thumb and index because that works better for me. If you want to use your 2 fingers, you can. I'm going to use the index. You can use 2 fingers, whatever works for you. So we know we have 2 beats. 1 and a 2 and. So I can play a couple of these 2-finger licks and they will fit over 2 beats. Let me see if I can use that in the context of the tune. Starting with the first chord. It's a 9-pound hammer, it's a little too heavy for my size. Okay, I rushed a little bit there, but you notice that I was able to switch to the 2-finger position and do enough notes out of that idea to fill that half beat. Okay, now we know that D's coming up and we have a half beat of a D chord. So I'm going to continue to use the 2-finger idea, but I'm going to move it to a D position and see if I can fill that in over the 2 beats of D. Here we go. It's a 9-pound hammer, it's a little too heavy for my size, honey, for my size. Okay, so we filled that half of that chorus with some of the standard licks we talked about. Now we're going into the next half of the chorus, so I need to find something to do for that. So let's start from the top again. It's a 9-pound hammer, it's a little too heavy for my size, honey, for my size. Well, roll on, buddy, with your roller coat. How can I roll when the wheels won't go? Okay, I had to do some more modifications, but it worked. Now that could be what I call practice scenario number 1 for a 9-pound hammer. What I'm going to do in the next video is maybe do a different version of the backup. Thanks.